My name is Elaine Morgan, 34, and I never thought I'd become the villain in my family story. Last Tuesday, I arrived early at my parents' house to pick up my daughter Harper. What I heard froze my blood. "Wash the dishes well, useless girl." My father's voice thundered while my sister Kimberly's daughters giggled. Harper's tiny hands trembled in soapy water, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, something inside me shattered. The mortgage payments I'd been making for my parents? They were about to end. Before I tell you what happened next, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to make a difficult choice to protect someone you love. Growing up in the Morgan household meant one thing. Kimberly came first. My sister, now 36, was always the golden child, her accomplishments celebrated, her failures excused. I still remember my 10th birthday when my parents gave me a used coloring book while they'd bought Kimberly a brand new bike just 2 weeks earlier for no special occasion. "We have to be practical with money," my mother Diane would say, though that practicality never seemed to apply to my sister. Our family home in suburban Boston held countless memories, most of them painful for me. My father, Richard, a high school history teacher with a thunderous voice, never missed an opportunity to compare us. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. My mother, a part-time librarian, would silently nod in agreement. Despite the constant comparisons, I excelled academically. When both Kimberly and I applied to colleges, she got into a state school while I received a scholarship to Boston University. My parents attended her orientation but claimed they were too busy for mine. I made the journey alone, carrying a single suitcase and determination to prove my worth. After graduating with honors in finance, I worked my way up to become a financial consultant for a prestigious firm in Boston. The irony wasn't lost on me that the daughter they'd neglected would become their financial safety net years later. My marriage to Jason wasn't planned as carefully as my career. We met at a conference, fell in love quickly, and married within a year. Harper came along soon after, a beautiful, curious girl with her father's hazel eyes and my stubbornness. But Jason wasn't ready for fatherhood. When Harper turned 3, he announced he'd made a mistake and left us for his 24-year-old assistant. The divorce was quick but painful. As a single mother, I needed help with childcare. When my parents offered to watch Harper twice a week while I worked late, I reluctantly agreed. Despite our strained relationship, I wanted Harper to know her grandparents, and babysitters in Boston weren't cheap. 4 years ago, when my parents faced foreclosure on their house, I stepped in. Dad had made some poor investment decisions, and they were 3 months behind on mortgage payments. "It's just temporary," they promised as I set up automatic transfers to cover their $2,300 monthly mortgage. That temporary arrangement had stretched to 4 years with no end in sight. Meanwhile, Kimberly married a car salesman named Greg, had 2 daughters, Amber and Melissa, now 12 and 10, and worked part-time at a boutique. She contributed nothing to our parents' expenses despite living just 15 minutes away. Her daughters were treated like royalty by our parents, given gifts on random Tuesdays, and taken on weekend trips to amusement parks. I'd noticed small things over the past few months that troubled me, Harper coming home from my parents' house unusually quiet, or mentioning that Grandma had called her clumsy when she spilled juice. Once, Harper asked why Grandpa called her not as bright as her cousins. I'd addressed these comments with my parents, who dismissed them as just jokes or claimed Harper misunderstood. Wanting to believe them, I'd accepted their explanations while making mental notes to be more attentive. My financial support of my parents wasn't common knowledge, not even Kimberly knew. I'd kept it private, partly from embarrassment that I was still seeking their approval through my checkbook, and partly because I knew my sister would feel entitled to similar help. In my heart, I hoped that by helping them financially, they would finally see my worth and treat Harper with the same affection they showed their other grandchildren. Looking back, I realize I was perpetuating the same dynamic I'd grown up with, trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I was teaching Harper the same toxic lesson, that love is conditional upon performance and financial contribution. Tuesday afternoon would change everything, though I didn't know it as I pulled into my parents' driveway 2 hours earlier than expected. The meeting with my last client ended early that Tuesday, so I decided to surprise Harper by picking her up ahead of schedule. As I pulled into my parents' circular driveway, I noticed Kimberly's red SUV parked haphazardly near the garage. She must have dropped by unexpectedly too. My parents lived in a colonial-style house in a quiet neighborhood, a home they'd owned for 30 years and nearly lost before I stepped in. I didn't immediately announce my arrival, planning to surprise Harper with the extra time we'd have together. The front door was unlocked, typical for my parents, despite my frequent warnings about security. As I stepped into the foyer, I heard the clinking of dishes from the kitchen, followed by my father's booming voice. No, no. You're doing it all wrong. His words bounced off the walls. Wash the dishes well, useless girl. Can't you do anything right? My feet froze to the floor. I'd heard my father angry before, but never directed at Harper with such venom. Richard, lower your voice, my mother said half-heartedly. The neighbors will hear. Not stop yelling at Harper. Not don't speak to her that way. Just concern about the neighbors. I moved silently toward the kitchen doorway, my heart pounding against my ribs. The scene that unfolded before me was worse than I imagined. Harper stood on a wobbly step stool at the sink, her small frame barely tall enough to reach the faucet. Her curly brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her pink t-shirt was soaked with dishwater. Her tiny hands, red from the hot water, trembled as she tried to scrub a large pot. My father loomed over her, his face flushed with anger. My mother stood by the refrigerator, arms crossed, looking more annoyed than concerned. At the kitchen table sat Kimberly, scrolling through her phone with disinterest, while her daughters Amber and Melissa giggled as they played a game on a tablet. She's so stupid, Amber whispered to Melissa loudly enough for Harper to hear. She can't even wash dishes right. Melissa snickered. That's because her dad didn't want her. Mom says that's why he left. My blood turned to ice. Had Kimberly been spreading such vicious lies about Harper's father? Harper's bottom lip quivered as she struggled with the pot, which was clearly too heavy for her 6-year-old arms. A single tear rolled down her cheek, which she quickly wiped away with her wet sleeve. Grandpa, it's really heavy, Harper whispered, her voice so small I barely heard it. Life is heavy, my father snapped. Your cousins knew how to wash dishes properly when they were your age. But you're just like your mother was. Always making excuses. My mother sighed dramatically. Richard, just let me do it. She's obviously not capable. No, my father insisted. She needs to learn responsibility. Not everything in life comes easy like it does for her mother. Elaine thinks money solves everything. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me. The man whose mortgage I paid monthly was lecturing my daughter about responsibility and criticizing me for using money to solve problems. A dish slipped from Harper's soapy fingers and clattered in the sink, though fortunately it didn't break. My father slammed his hand on the counter, making Harper jump and cower. For God's sake, can't you do anything right? This is why your cousins are always ahead of you. In that moment, I saw myself at 6 years old, trying desperately to please my father, always falling short, always compared unfavorably to Kimberly. It was history repeating itself, the same toxic pattern extending to the next generation. Harper's shoulders hunched forward in a posture of defeat I recognized all too well. Mom says Aunt Elaine spoils her, Amber announced loudly, looking up from the tablet. That's why she's so useless. Kimberly finally glanced up from her phone. Amber, that's enough. But there was no real reprimand in her tone, and she immediately returned to scrolling. As Harper struggled to lift the pot to rinse it, more water splashed onto her clothes. My father threw his hands up in exasperation. Useless. Absolutely useless, he shouted. You're getting water everywhere. Your cousins never made such a mess. That was the moment something inside me snapped. A memory flashed before my eyes, me at 7, dropping a glass of milk at dinner, my father's face contorted with the same rage, the same cutting words. I had promised myself that Harper would never know that feeling of worthlessness, yet here she was, experiencing the same trauma. In that horrible moment, I realized this wasn't an isolated incident. The small comments Harper had reported, the changes in her behavior after visits with my parents, they weren't misunderstandings or exaggerations. This was a pattern, one that had likely been happening for months while I was working to pay for the very roof under which my daughter was being emotionally abused. I watched as Harper's small shoulders began to shake with silent sobs, trying so hard not to cry openly and give my father another reason to berate her. That was the final straw. Take your hands off that pot right now, Harper. My voice cut through the kitchen like a knife, startling everyone. 5 heads whipped around toward me, expressions ranging from shock to guilt to, in my father's case, defiance. Elaine, my mother exclaimed. We weren't expecting you for another 2 hours. Harper's face crumpled with relief as she spotted me. Mommy. She jumped down from the stool and ran to me, wrapping her wet arms around my legs. I could feel her tiny body trembling against me. What exactly is going on here? I asked, my voice dangerously calm as I placed a protective hand on Harper's head. My father recovered quickly, his expression shifting from surprise to defensive anger. Teaching your daughter some responsibility, since you clearly haven't bothered. By calling her useless? By forcing her to wash dishes she can barely lift. The control I was maintaining over my voice was tenuous at best. She needs to learn, my mother interjected. The girls all help around the house. I looked pointedly at Amber and Melissa, who were still playing on their tablet, no chores in sight. Really? All the girls. Kimberly finally put her phone down. Don't start, Elaine. The girls already did their chores earlier. Did they? Or is it just that Harper is the only one expected to earn her keep around here? I countered. My father stepped forward, towering over me just as he had over Harper moments before. It was a tactic that had intimidated me throughout my childhood, but it wouldn't work today. Don't you take that tone with us, he growled. We're watching your daughter for free twice a week, so you can chase your fancy career. A little gratitude would be appropriate. Gratitude? I echoed, disbelief coloring my voice. For emotionally abusing my child? For calling her useless and stupid? We never said stupid, my mother quickly defended. But you stood by while Amber did, I shot back. And don't pretend this is the first time. Harper, sweetheart, I knelt down to my daughter's level. Has Grandpa talked to you like this before? Harper glanced fearfully at my father before nodding slowly. Use your words, honey. It's okay to tell the truth. Every time I come here, she whispered. Grandpa makes me clean while Amber and Melissa play. When I can't do something right, he gets really mad and says I'm not as good as them. The room fell silent. My mother looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Kimberly shifted uncomfortably, while my father's face reddened further. That's an exaggeration, he snapped. She's being dramatic. No, I'm not. Harper's voice gained strength. You called me stupid last week when I couldn't read the big word in your newspaper. You said Amber could read it when she was 5. I felt sick. What other things have they said to you that you haven't told me about? Harper looked down at her shoes. Grandma told me not to eat too much because I'll get fat like Daddy was. And Amber said my daddy left because he didn't want me, and Grandma heard her say it but didn't tell her to stop. I stood up slowly, my entire body shaking with rage. Kimberly, get your daughters and leave. Now. Excuse me. Kimberly scoffed. You don't get to order me around. Either you leave, or you can stay and hear exactly what I think of you allowing your children to bully a 6-year-old. Your choice. Something in my expression must have convinced her I meant business. With an exaggerated sigh, she collected her daughters and their tablet. Come on, girls. Aunt Elaine is having one of her moments. As they filed past me, I called after her and Kimberly. If I ever hear that your daughters have repeated those lies about Harper's father again, our relationship is permanently over. Once the front door slammed behind them, I turned back to my parents. How dare you? How dare you treat my daughter this way? You're overreacting, my mother said dismissively. Children need discipline. Discipline? This isn't discipline. This is the same emotional abuse you subjected me to my entire childhood. The same favoritism, the same impossible standards, the same cruel comparisons. We gave you everything, my father shouted. A roof over your head, food, education. You gave Kimberly everything, I corrected him. I was just the afterthought, the one who was never quite good enough. And now you're doing the same thing to Harper. After all we've done for you, my mother's voice took on the martyred tone I knew so well. This is how you repay us? With accusations and ingratitude. I laughed, a harsh sound without humor. What exactly have you done for me, Mom? Because from where I'm standing, I'm the one who's been supporting you both for the past 4 years. Their faces registered shock. Clearly, they hadn't expected me to mention the financial arrangement in front of Harper. That's different, my father blustered. That's family helping family. Family doesn't call a 6-year-old useless. Family doesn't stand by while a child is bullied. And family certainly doesn't play favorites with grandchildren. I took Harper's hand firmly in mine. We're leaving. And don't expect us back anytime soon. You're being ridiculous, my mother hissed. You can't keep Harper from us. We're her grandparents. Watch me, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Being grandparents is a privilege, not a right. And you've just lost that privilege. As I guided Harper toward the door, my father called after me, "Don't forget who pays your bills, young lady." I stopped and turned slowly. I think you have that backwards, Dad. I pay your bills. But don't worry, that's about to change too. We left them standing in the kitchen, my father's face purple with rage, my mother's mouth open in shock. In the car, Harper's small voice broke the silence. Are we in trouble, Mommy? I looked at her in the rearview mirror, this beautiful child who deserved so much better than what my parents had given her. No, sweetheart. We're not in trouble. But Grandma and Grandpa are. The drive home was painful. Harper sat quietly in her booster seat, occasionally sniffling. At a red light, I glanced back to see her staring out the window, her usually vibrant face hollow with exhaustion. Harper, I need you to know something, I said gently. Nothing that happened today was your fault. Nothing. But I couldn't wash the dishes right, she whispered. Honey, you're 6 years old. You shouldn't have been washing heavy pots at all. That's an adult job. Grandpa said I needed to learn because you spoil me. Each word was like a knife to my heart. Can you tell me what else happens when you're at Grandma and Grandpa's house? The truth, even if it's hard to say. As we drove through Boston's evening traffic, Harper's story unfolded. Every Tuesday and Thursday, while I worked late, my parents had been putting her to work, cleaning bathrooms, vacuuming, even weeding the garden. Meanwhile, when Kimberly dropped off her daughters, they were treated to cookies and cartoons. The blatant favoritism extended to meals. Her cousins got dessert. Harper didn't. Activities. Her cousins chose the games. Harper had to go along, and praise, lavished on her cousins, withheld from Harper. Why didn't you tell me, sweetheart? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Grandpa said you had important work and shouldn't be bothered with silly things. And that you'd be disappointed in me if you knew I couldn't do chores like Amber and Melissa. We reached our apartment building, but I couldn't bring myself to get out of the car yet. Guilt crushed me like a physical weight. How had I missed this? How had I allowed history to repeat itself? Harper, listen to me. I turned fully around to face her. I am never, ever disappointed in you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you will never have to earn my love by doing chores or being perfect, okay? Her small nod wasn't convincing, but it was a start. That night, after tucking Harper into bed with extra stories and reassurance, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and my laptop. My hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly as I logged into my online banking portal. For years of automatic payments to my parents' mortgage company were listed in neat rows, $2, $300 every month without fail, totaling over $110,000. I clicked Cancel Recurring Payment and confirmed without hesitation. Next, I called my financial advisor, Craig, despite the late hour. "Elaine? Everything okay?" he answered, concern evident in his voice. "I need to make some changes to my portfolio," I explained, my voice steadier than I expected. "The money that was going to my parents' mortgage, I want it redirected to Harper's college fund. That's a significant sum. Are you sure about this change?" "Absolutely certain," I replied. "And Craig?" "I'd also like to look into setting up a trust for Harper that my parents cannot access under any circumstances." After finishing with Craig, I turned off my phone, knowing the calls would start soon. Sure enough, when I checked my messages the next morning, there were 7 missed calls from my parents and a dozen text messages ranging from confused to angry. "Payment declined? Call us immediately." "What game are you playing, Elaine? Your mother is beside herself with worry. Call us now." I deleted them all without responding. At work the next day, I could barely focus. During my lunch break, I called my friend Stephanie, the only person who truly understood my complicated family dynamics. "You did the right thing," she reassured me after I recounted the previous day's events. "Your parents were emotionally abusing Harper, just like they did to you. But cutting them off financially feels so drastic." "What's drastic is a grown man calling his 6-year-old granddaughter useless," Stephanie pointed out. "What's drastic is making a child do chores that adults should be handling. What's drastic is continuing the same toxic patterns with Harper that damaged you. What you did. That's just establishing boundaries." Her words helped, but didn't entirely alleviate my guilt. Years of conditioning had taught me that my parents' happiness was somehow my responsibility. That evening, Kimberly unleashed a barrage of text messages. "Mom and Dad told me what you did. How could you be so selfish? They're your parents. You can't just cut them off because of one little incident. Harper needs to toughen up. The real world isn't going to coddle her like you do." I waited until Harper was asleep before responding with a single message. "My financial arrangements with Mom and Dad are none of your business. And if you ever allow your daughters to bully Harper again, you'll be cut off too. Not financially, but completely from our lives." She didn't respond. 3 days after the incident, the bank called to inform me that my father had attempted to access my personal accounts, claiming he had authorization. He didn't, of course, and the attempt was flagged as suspicious activity. I immediately changed all my passwords and security questions. The picture becoming clearer was disturbing. My parents had never viewed me as a daughter they loved unconditionally. I was a resource, a means to financial security, someone whose primary value was what I could provide for them. And they were grooming Harper to see herself the same way. Through careful conversations with Harper and her pediatrician, I learned more about what had been happening during those twice-weekly visits. My parents had been systematically undermining Harper's self-esteem while elevating her cousins. They told her repeatedly that she wasn't as smart, as pretty, or as capable as Amber and Melissa. They'd made her feel that she had to earn love through service and perfection, the same toxic message I'd received throughout my childhood. The most painful revelation came when I discovered that my parents had never actually saved for retirement. Despite decades of adequate income, they'd spent everything they earned, assuming first that Kimberly would support them, until she married a man with modest means, and then turning to me as their financial safety net. The mortgage payments weren't a temporary situation. They were the beginning of what they expected to be lifelong support. I had been manipulated, just as they were now attempting to manipulate Harper. But the cycle would end with me. A week after I canceled the mortgage payments, my parents escalated their attempts to contact me. My father left a threatening voicemail that made my skin crawl. "Elaine, This is your father. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it ends now. We received a notice from the bank about the mortgage payment. Fix this immediately. You have a responsibility to this family. Don't forget who raised you and put a roof over your head for 18 years. Call me back today, or there will be consequences. His message confirmed what I already knew. They saw my financial support not as generous assistance, but as an obligation, a debt I owed them simply for existing. My mother took a different approach, calling my office directly when I wouldn't answer her calls to my cell phone. Elaine Morgan's office, my assistant answered. This is Diane Morgan, Elaine's mother, I heard her say when my assistant put the call on speaker per our arrangement. I need to speak with her right away. It's an emergency. I nodded to my assistant, who put the call through. Mom, what's the emergency? I asked, my voice professionally neutral. My blood pressure is through the roof because of your stunt with the mortgage payment, she hissed. The doctor says this stress could give me a heart attack. Is that what you want? What I want is for you to respect my boundaries and treat my daughter with kindness, I replied evenly. And medical emergencies should be directed to 911, not my office. Please don't call me at work again. I hung up before she could respond. That afternoon, I met with a therapist recommended by Harper's pediatrician. Dr. Sarah Bennett specialized in family trauma and boundary setting. What you're describing is a classic pattern of generational emotional abuse, she explained after I shared our situation. Your parents treated you as the scapegoat child while your sister was the golden child. Now they're extending that dynamic to the next generation. But am I overreacting by cutting them off financially? I asked, the guilt still nagging at me. Elaine, imagine if a stranger treated Harper the way your father did. Would you continue paying that stranger's bills? Put that way, the answer was obvious. No, of course not. Financial support is not an obligation, especially when it's being used as leverage for continued emotional abuse. Your parents are adults who are capable of supporting themselves. Your daughter is a child who depends on you for protection. I left that session feeling more validated but unprepared for what came next. 2 days later, while picking Harper up from school, I ran into Kimberly doing the same with Melissa. She cornered me in the parking lot. The bank is threatening foreclosure again, she said without preamble. Mom and Dad can't make the payment on their own. That's unfortunate, I replied, helping Harper into her booster seat. That's it? That's all you have to say? Kimberly's voice rose, attracting attention from other parents. They're your parents, Elaine. Yes, they are. And Harper is my daughter. I will not finance people who abuse her, family or not. Kimberly's face flushed with anger. Abuse? Don't be so dramatic. Dad was just trying to teach her responsibility. By calling her useless? By forcing her to do chores her cousins don't have to do? By telling her she's not as good as Amber and Melissa? I kept my voice low but firm. That's emotional abuse, Kimberly. And you know it because we both grew up with it. The difference is you were on the favored side. So this is about childhood jealousy? You're punishing Mom and Dad because you think they loved me more. No, this is about protecting my daughter from experiencing the same damage I did. And if you had any empathy at all, you'd understand that. Kimberly's expression shifted, a momentary flicker of something like recognition crossing her face before the defensiveness returned. Well, don't expect me to bail them out. Greg and I can't afford their mortgage. I never expected you to, I replied honestly. But maybe it's time our parents learn to support themselves instead of depending on their children. That evening, my parents showed up unannounced at my apartment. I spotted them through the peephole and spoke through the closed door. I'm not opening the door. Please leave. Elaine, don't be ridiculous, my mother's voice was shrill. We need to talk about this like adults. I agree. When you're ready to talk respectfully and acknowledge how you've treated Harper, we can meet in a neutral location with a family therapist present. Until then, please leave before I call building security. You'd call security on your own parents? My father's voice boomed through the door. After everything we've done for you? Yes, I would. And I think we have very different recollections of what you've done for me versus what I've done for you. They eventually left, but not before my father shouted, "This isn't over, Elaine." He was right about that, at least. The next day, I received a call from my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister who lived in Vermont. We weren't close, but she'd always been kind to me. "Elaine, honey, I'm hearing some concerning things from your mother," she began. "She says you've cut them off completely because of some misunderstanding with Harper?" I sighed, realizing my parents were now attempting to recruit extended family as flying monkeys. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Aunt Linda. Dad was verbally abusing Harper while Mom stood by and did nothing, just like they did with me growing up." There was a pause before Linda responded. "You know, I saw how they treated you compared to Kimberly. I should have said something back then, but your mother and I, well, we've never had an easy relationship. I didn't feel it was my place." Her admission surprised me. "You noticed?" Of course I noticed. It was hard to miss, but whenever I brought it up, your mother would get defensive and cut me off for months. Eventually, I stopped trying. She paused again. "I'm sorry, Elaine. I should have been braver." Her validation meant more than she could know. "Thank you for saying that. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing by protecting Harper. And between us, your parents have always been financially irresponsible. Your grandfather left them a significant inheritance that should have set them up for life, but they went through it in less than 5 years." This was news to me. I had no idea. They've always expected others to bail them out. First your grandfather, then you. It's not right, and it's not your responsibility. After speaking with Aunt Linda, I felt stronger in my resolve. The conversation also helped me understand that my parents' behavior was part of a larger pattern that predated even my birth. 2 weeks after I'd canceled the mortgage payments, my parents received their first formal notice of foreclosure proceedings. As expected, they blamed me entirely, sending a group email to the entire extended family detailing how I had abandoned them in their time of need because of a minor disciplinary incident with Harper. The email backfired spectacularly. Several family members who had witnessed my parents' treatment of me over the years replied with their own observations, defending my decision. Others reached out to me privately, offering support. The family narrative was shifting, and my parents were losing control of it. Meanwhile, Harper had started seeing a child psychologist who specialized in emotional abuse. After just 3 sessions, Dr. Martinez requested a meeting with me. "Harper is exhibiting signs of anxiety and low self-esteem consistent with emotional mistreatment," she explained gently. "The good news is that you've intervened early, and with consistent positive reinforcement and absence of the negative influences, children her age are remarkably resilient." "So she'll be okay?" I asked, the knot of worry in my chest loosening slightly. "With time and the right support, yes. But I strongly recommend continuing to limit contact with her grandparents until significant changes occur in their behavior." I nodded, more certain than ever that I'd made the right decision. After a month of limited contact, my parents' financial situation reached a crisis point. The bank had scheduled a foreclosure date, and reality was finally setting in. My father called on a Sunday afternoon, his voice noticeably subdued. "Elaine, we need to talk. In person." I'd been expecting this call. "I'm willing to meet, but only with a family therapist present, as I mentioned before." He started to argue, but stopped himself. "Fine. Whatever you want." I arranged for us to meet with Dr. Bennett, the therapist I'd been seeing, at her office the following week. I hired a babysitter for Harper, not wanting to expose her to potentially volatile emotions. The office was a neutral space with comfortable seating and soft lighting designed to put clients at ease. My parents arrived precisely on time, both looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen them. My father had lost weight, and my mother's usually perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Dr. Bennett began by establishing ground rules. "We're here to communicate openly and honestly, but respectfully. Everyone will have a chance to speak without interruption. Our goal is to understand each other's perspectives and find a path forward, if possible. My father shifted impatiently but nodded. Elaine, would you like to start by explaining why you requested this meeting? Dr. Bennett asked. I took a deep breath. I'm here because I want to establish clear boundaries regarding Harper. What happened at your house last month was emotional abuse, and it wasn't an isolated incident. Harper has shared multiple examples of being treated differently from her cousins, being belittled, and being made to feel worthless. That's an exaggeration, my mother interrupted immediately. Dr. Bennett held up her hand. Diane, you'll have your turn to respond. Please allow Elaine to finish. I continued, this pattern of favoritism and criticism is exactly what I experienced growing up. The difference is that I'm in a position to protect Harper from it. I will not allow her to internalize the message that she has to earn love through perfection or service. As for the financial situation, I added, I've been supporting you both for 4 years with the understanding that it was temporary assistance during a difficult time. Instead, it's become an expectation with no end date. I'm not comfortable continuing to finance people who mistreat my daughter, regardless of our family relationship. When I finished, my father could barely contain himself. As soon as Dr. Bennett nodded to him, he leaned forward aggressively. This is ridiculous. We've done nothing but love and care for Harper. Yes, I was teaching her responsibility, something you clearly haven't done. As for the money, that was your choice. Nobody forced you to help us. But to cut us off without warning because of one stern moment is vindictive and cruel. Richard, Dr. Bennett interjected, I hear that you feel Elaine's decision was unfair. Can you try to understand why, from her perspective, seeing her daughter called useless might have been deeply concerning? Kids need discipline, he insisted. The world isn't going to coddle her. There's a difference between discipline and humiliation, I pointed out. Calling a child useless isn't discipline, it's emotional abuse. My mother jumped in, her voice taking on the wounded tone I knew so well. We've always done our best, Elaine. We're not perfect, but we love Harper. And we're your parents. You can't just cut us out of your life because we disciplined her once. It wasn't once, I replied firmly. Harper has told me about numerous incidents where she was made to feel less than her cousins, where she was given chores they weren't expected to do, where she was criticized while they were praised. Children exaggerate, my mother dismissed. Dr. Bennett leaned forward. Diane, Richard, I'd like to share something from my professional experience. Children rarely fabricate specific patterns of emotional mistreatment. They might misinterpret a single incident, but consistent reports of differential treatment usually have a basis in reality. My father's face reddened. So you're taking her side too? I'm not taking sides, Dr. Bennett clarified. I'm providing context from my expertise. What matters now is whether you're willing to acknowledge that your behavior might have hurt Harper and work toward changing that dynamic. And if we do, my father demanded, will you start paying the mortgage again? His question revealed everything about his priorities. Not Harper's well-being. Not repairing our relationship. The money. No, I said quietly. My financial support was never contingent on your behavior. It was always meant to be temporary, and it's now concluded permanently. What I'm offering is the possibility of a relationship with Harper moving forward, but only if significant changes occur. You can't keep her from us, my mother insisted. We're her grandparents. Actually, she can, Dr. Bennett interjected. Legally and ethically, Elaine has every right to determine who has access to her child, especially if she believes that access is harmful. The meeting continued for another hour, cycling through the same points. My parents alternated between denial, minimizing, and occasionally, when they remembered the potential consequences, reluctant acknowledgement that perhaps they had been a bit harsh with Harper. By the end, we had established some basic parameters. If my parents wanted to see Harper again, they would need to 1. Attend therapy sessions to address their behaviors and understand appropriate interactions with children. 2. Acknowledge the favoritism and commit to treating all grandchildren equally. 3. Respect my parenting decisions without undermining them. 4. Start with brief, supervised visits only after showing progress in therapy. My father balked at the therapy requirement, but my mother surprisingly agreed. If that's what it takes to see Harper, we'll do it. As for their financial situation, I made it clear that while I wouldn't resume mortgage payments, I was willing to connect them with a financial advisor who could help them develop a plan for their retirement, including possibly selling their house and downsizing to something more affordable. "We can't sell the house," my father protested. "It's our home." "It's a house you can't afford," I pointed out gently. "And it's not worth losing your relationship with Harper." 2 weeks after our session, my parents received their formal foreclosure notice. Reality finally sank in. They called to inform me they were putting the house on the market and had found a smaller condo nearby that fit their budget. I expressed my support for their decision without offering financial assistance. Meanwhile, Harper continued her sessions with Dr. Martinez. As weeks passed without the toxic influence of my parents, I noticed significant changes in her. She laughed more freely, tried new things without fear of failure, and stopped apologizing constantly for minor mistakes. Her teacher commented on her increased participation in class and growing confidence. One evening, as I tucked her into bed, Harper asked, "Mommy, are Grandma and Grandpa mad at me because I told you what happened?" "No, sweetheart," I assured her. "They're not mad at you. They're learning that the way they spoke to you wasn't kind or fair. And until they learn to be kind, we're taking a break from seeing them." "Like a timeout?" she asked, her innocent analogy striking me with its accuracy. "Yes, exactly like a timeout. Adults need those sometimes too." 3 months after our initial therapy session, my parents had attended 6 sessions of their own and requested another joint session. Dr. Bennett reported that while they had initially been resistant, they were beginning to recognize their patterns, particularly my mother. During our joint session, my mother surprised me by addressing Harper's treatment directly. "I saw how Richard spoke to Harper, and I did nothing. I saw how differently we treated her compared to Amber and Melissa, and I justified it. I'm beginning to understand that we were repeating with Harper what we did with you, and I'm truly sorry, Elaine." My father, less emotionally articulate but making an effort, added I was wrong to call Harper useless. No child should hear that. I'm trying to do better. Their acknowledgement wasn't perfect, but it was progress. We agreed to a short, supervised visit in a neutral location, a park near my apartment. The visit was awkward but civil. My parents brought Harper a book rather than candy or toys, showing they'd listened to my parenting preferences. My father maintained a respectful distance, speaking to Harper only when she initiated conversation. My mother made a visible effort to avoid criticizing or correcting Harper's behavior. As we were leaving, Harper surprised everyone by giving my mother a quick hug. "Bye, Grandma. I like the book." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "I'm glad, Harper. I hope we can read it together sometime." The road to healing would be long and would likely have setbacks. Patterns established over decades don't disappear overnight. But that small moment in the park gave me hope that perhaps, with boundaries firmly in place, some form of healthy relationship might be possible. My parents sold their house the following month, paying off the mortgage and purchasing a modest condo with the remaining equity. My father found part-time work as a tour guide at a local historical site, and my mother increased her hours at the library. They were adjusting to living within their means for the first time in decades. Kimberly, surprisingly, reached out to me after my parents moved. "I didn't realize how much they depended on you financially," she admitted over coffee. "And I've been thinking about how they treated us differently growing up. I always saw it as me being the favorite, but now I wonder if it was actually fair to either of us." "What do you mean?" I asked. You were held to impossible standards and criticized constantly. But I was never expected to accomplish anything on my own. They didn't prepare me for real life at all." She hesitated. "And I'm worried I'm doing the same thing with my girls." It was the most insightful thing I'd ever heard Kimberly say. "There's still time to change that pattern," I told her. 6 months after the incident in my parents' kitchen, we had established a new normal. Harper saw her grandparents once every 2 weeks for a few hours, always with me present. My parents continued their therapy, making slow but steady progress in understanding the damage their behavior had caused. They had apologized to Harper directly, in age-appropriate terms, for making her feel bad about herself. The most significant moment came when Harper dropped her ice cream cone during one visit. She froze, her eyes darting fearfully to my father, clearly expecting anger or criticism. Instead, he said calmly, "That happens sometimes. Let's get you another one." Later, he told me privately, I saw the fear in her eyes. She was afraid of me. I never want to see that look again. It wasn't a perfect ending, real life rarely provides those. But it was a beginning of something healthier. The cycle of favoritism and emotional abuse that had damaged me was being broken, not just for Harper, but potentially for Amber and Melissa too, as Kimberly began to recognize the harmful patterns in her own parenting. Harper was flourishing, my parents were becoming more self-sufficient, and I was learning that establishing boundaries wasn't selfish, it was necessary for healing. The financial umbilical cord had been cut, allowing more authentic relationships to develop in its place. 6 months turned into a year, and the changes in our family dynamic became more established. Harper, now 7, had blossomed in ways that made my heart swell with pride. No longer walking on eggshells or apologizing for existing, she had developed a confidence that showed in everything from her schoolwork to her friendships. Miss Morgan, her teacher, told me during a parent-teacher conference, "Harper has become one of our most enthusiastic participants in class." Last year, she was so hesitant to answer questions, but now she's the first to raise her hand. These changes hadn't happened overnight. They were the result of consistent therapy, a stable, affirming home environment, and careful rebuilding of her relationship with my parents under supervised conditions. Our new family routine involved brief visits with my parents every other weekend, always in public places or at my apartment with me present. These boundaries had initially felt rigid and uncomfortable, but over time, they created a sense of safety that allowed genuine connections to form. My parents had downsized to a 2-bedroom condo that they could actually afford. The process of selling their house and eliminating their debt had been painful but ultimately liberating for them. My father had continued his part-time work as a historical tour guide, discovering a genuine passion for storytelling that had been dormant during his teaching career. My mother had joined a book club at the library where she worked, developing friendships outside the family for perhaps the first time in her life. They were learning to live within their means, and more importantly, they were learning that relationships couldn't be bought or maintained through financial dependence. It was a difficult lesson at their age, but one that had ultimately strengthened our family. "I never realized how much our financial situation affected our relationship with you," my mother admitted during one of our conversations. "We started seeing you as a resource rather than a daughter. That wasn't fair to you." My father, still less verbally expressive than my mother, showed his change through actions rather than words. He had begun asking Harper about her interests and actually listening to her responses. He brought books on topics she enjoyed and sat patiently while she read to him, never correcting or criticizing when she stumbled over words. The most remarkable change came in the relationship between Harper and her cousins. Kimberly, shaken by the family upheaval and her own recognition of the unhealthy patterns she was perpetuating, had begun family therapy with her daughters. Amber and Melissa, initially resistant, were slowly learning that privilege and favoritism didn't serve them well in the long run. During a carefully planned play date at a neutral location, I watched in amazement as Amber helped Harper with a difficult puzzle rather than mocking her efforts. When Melissa attempted to revert to their old dynamic, making a cutting remark about Harper's shoes, Kimberly intervened immediately. "Melissa, that comment wasn't kind or necessary. Please apologize to your cousin." The look of shock on Melissa's face was matched only by the surprise on Harper's. But the apology came, awkward but genuine, and a small shift occurred in their relationship. Family therapy continued, both individually and occasionally as a group. During one particularly powerful session, Dr. Bennett guided us through an exercise in which each person shared what they needed from the others to feel valued and respected. When it was Harper's turn, she said simply, "I need everyone to remember that I'm still learning. It's okay if I make mistakes." The simplicity and wisdom of her statement brought tears to my eyes. Out of the mouth of a 7-year-old came the lesson my parents had failed to learn in 7 decades. My relationship with Kimberly had undergone its own transformation. The wall of resentment and competition that had separated us since childhood had begun to crumble as we both recognized our roles in the dysfunctional family system. "I always thought you were just jealous of me," she confessed during a rare sister lunch. "I never understood that I was benefiting from their favoritism at your expense. And I always thought you were complicit in it," I admitted. I never considered that being the golden child came with its own pressures and problems. We weren't best friends and probably never would be, but we had developed a mutual respect that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. The most profound change, however, was within me. The guilt and obligation that had driven me to financially support my parents while accepting their mistreatment of Harper had been replaced by a clear-eyed understanding of healthy boundaries. I had learned that love didn't require martyrdom, that helping others shouldn't come at the expense of my child's well-being, and that financial support wasn't a substitute for genuine respect. I'd also learned the power of breaking generational patterns. By refusing to allow Harper to be treated as I had been, I had not only protected her but had created the possibility of healing for our entire family. The cycle of emotional abuse, favoritism, and financial dependence that had persisted for generations had been interrupted. A year after that fateful day in my parents' kitchen, we celebrated Harper's 7th birthday with a small party at our apartment. My parents attended, bearing a thoughtfully chosen gift and interacting appropriately with Harper and her friends. Kimberly brought Amber and Melissa, who played with the other children without the hierarchical dynamic that had previously defined their relationship with Harper. As I watched Harper blow out her candles, surrounded by people who were learning to love her properly, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. The journey hadn't been easy, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead, but we had fundamentally changed our family's trajectory. That night, after the guests had left and Harper was tucked into bed, she asked me a question that summed up everything we had been through. "Mommy, is it okay that I love Grandma and Grandpa again, even though they were mean before?" I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. "Absolutely, sweetheart. People can make mistakes, even big ones, and still change for the better. The important thing is that they're trying to be kinder now, and that you know you deserve to be treated with respect and love, always." She nodded thoughtfully. "I think they're learning, just like I'm learning my multiplication tables. Sometimes it's hard to learn new things when you're old." I laughed at her characterization of my parents as old, but the wisdom in her observation was undeniable. "That's very true, Harper. And I'm proud of you for being willing to give them another chance." As I reflect on our journey, I realize that canceling my parents' house payments wasn't really about revenge, though it might have felt that way in the moment. It was about refusing to fund my own daughter's mistreatment. It was about breaking financial dependence that had become toxic. And most importantly, it was about showing Harper that she was worth standing up for, even when it was difficult, even when it meant confronting family. The truth is, sometimes the most loving thing we can do for others is to establish clear boundaries. Sometimes the path to healing requires discomfort and change. And sometimes, protecting those we love means making difficult choices that others may not understand. What about you? Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with family members? How did you balance compassion with self-protection? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember to like this video if you found our journey helpful, subscribe for more stories about family healing and boundaries, and share with someone who might need to hear that standing up for themselves or their children is not only okay, it's sometimes necessary. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember, breaking generational patterns isn't easy, but the freedom it brings to future generations makes every difficult conversation, every uncomfortable confrontation, and every painful realization worthwhile. Be well and be brave.